My lesson today is on note taking. So this week you've been watching some videos and then doing some writing. And I didn't really intend for you to take really detailed notes during these videos because honestly, I just want you to get the gist or the big picture of what was going on at that time. But we have talked this year about lots of different ways to take notes. And I just wanted to remind you. So if you could grab a piece of paper and a pencil, we're going to take some notes on how to take notes. How about that? Grab a pencil and paper and title the page Note Taking. Now I say we've talked about lots of ways to take notes. I've never actually said to you, hey, let's have a class on note taking. So please title the top of your page Note Taking, if you can read my very messy handwriting. All right. There are lots, just like there are lots of ways to read and there are lots of ways to write, there are a lot of ways to take notes. So it really depends on what you're taking notes for. So does anybody remember one way I've talked about taking notes? Think about your book clubs. Have I suggested taking notes in your book clubs at all? Anybody remember? See Clara's hand up. Anybody else? Deckard's got his hand up. All right, Clara, what's one way I've talked about taking notes in your book club?
I don't know which one of these is, but you talked about, I use bullet points, but you can also use graphs like the ones you use for social studies.
Okay, so some of you recently were using the bullet points. I call them boxes and bullets. So some of you in your book clubs were taking notes on nonfiction using, I call boxes, which equals a main idea or an important topic, and then bullets, which are these little points underneath, which equal supporting details. So this is one way to take notes. This way works really well for nonfiction. I know Tomomi took a bunch of these notes and a lot of your groups took these notes, boxes and bullets. You might have learned that at school. It's a really good way when you're reading nonfiction of tracking the most important information. I think the important thing about this note taking is you're not writing down every word. You're only writing down really big ideas. For example, I think Tomomi was taking notes on dolphins, and she wrote down dolphins in the big box, and then 3 really important things you need to know about dolphins. They're mammals. That means they feed their babies milk. They breathe through a blowhole. So even though they're mammals like us who breathe with lungs, they don't use their mouth to breathe. They use this blowhole to breathe. And they have a way of communicating through sonar. So writing down 3 details like that instead of every single detail you read. Boxes and bullets is short, it's quick, it's to the point. Okay? Main ideas and supportive details, and it's short. Does anybody remember another style of note taking? I'll give you a hint. Any hands up?
Sticky notes.
Sticky notes. All year long I've been saying, when you're reading, it's a really good idea to have sticky notes out. If we were in class, I'm going to tell you I'm the queen of the sticky notes. You would have had tons of sticky notes on your table groups. You would have had sticky notes next to you. You would be putting sticky notes in your books. And then when you go to write, we're about to use this method a little bit. I recommend when we start our nonfiction books that you're going to write, which I've decided to hold off for another week so that you can finish the Oregon unit next week and not have to also be starting your book. But when we start our books in another week, I really recommend this method. And the reason I do is it helps you with a couple of things. One, it helps you keep it short because there's not much space on a sticky note. 2, it helps you keep it in the book where it's happened. So if you come back to your book club and you're like, oh, one thing I found interesting in my book is on page 7. Well, you didn't have to write down page 7 because it's right on that page, right? And you've got the picture right there and the details. So if you're sharing with your book club, you can easily share if you have your Post-it note on that page. The last thing I want to say that's fun with sticky notes is sometimes when I see kids who are writing too many notes, you know, suppose you're a kid who like tends to write down every single word. One thing you can do with sticky notes is you can put them in a book ahead of time. So you can take your book and you can say, okay, I'm going to read a chunk of text to get the main idea, and then I'm going to write my sticky note. So before I even read this book, I'm going to go in ahead of time. I'm going to go 3 pages and put a sticky note. 1, 2, 3 pages and put a sticky note. Now when I'm reading, I might be tempted to stop and write something down, but I'm not going to let myself stop reading till I get to the sticky note. So sticky notes can serve as a really great way of reminding us that when we're reading, we need to do more reading than taking notes. Okay. The other nice thing with a sticky note is because it's small, it makes you do the work of note taking. Sometimes kids think note taking is easy because you just write down what the book says, but I'm here to tell you that isn't true. Note taking is kind of rocket science because to take a good note means you've read information, then you've asked yourself, what's most important? What do I really need to remember? And is it important or is it just interesting? So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. This is a book about Harriet Tubman. Has anybody seen that movie, Harriet, about Harriet Tubman? She was an amazing woman. You know, I've heard about her for years because she was someone who helped the slaves escape from the South. She was an escaped slave herself, but I never knew how amazing she was until I saw that movie. Alaya, did you see that?
No, but she actually helped like spy around the wars for Abraham Lincoln.
She did in the Civil War. You're exactly right. So that was one of the things that amazed me, that she was a woman and she was really involved in that war. So she was super physically strong, which I really admire about her. So she's a fascinating person. This book's too long to read the whole thing to you right now, but I will show you how I would take notes on this book a little bit. So let's say I'm reading along in this book. The night was dark, cricket song filled the air. A woman hid outside a cabin. She whistled a song, Go Down Moses. A line in the song said, Let my people go. Inside the cabin, the slaves knew that Harriet Tubman had come to lead her people out of slavery. It was 1851. Harriet Tubman was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad wasn't a real railroad. It was the name people gave to the route taking slaves north to freedom. Years before, a slave had run off. He seemed to disappear right in front of his owner's eyes. He must have gone on an underground railroad, said the owner, and the story spread. There was a way north to the free states. Okay, so we just read a chunk of text. Now, when I read that, like some things I remember are like that song she sang, Go Down Moses. Show me thumbs up or thumbs down. Do you think that's an important note to take, the name of the song? I see some thumbs down. Good job. I don't think it's that important. It's kind of interesting. It kind of pops out at me, but I think they put that in there to grab my attention. The name of the song she sang is not something that I need to remember her for. What about that there were, what about her name, Harriet Tubman? Would that be something to write down? Yeah, her name would definitely be something to write down. The date, 1851, important or not important?
Important.
Yeah, pretty important. I can jot that down. Harriet Tubman, 1851. I think the last thing that I always want you asking yourselves is so what? What would be the big so what on that page? What would be the important thing we learned? Any ideas, Joey or Alma or Subi? Vi, Griffin, what do you think? Bye, welcome Kavai. Raed, anybody? Nobody has any ideas? Raina, go ahead.
So I think something that's important is the name of the Underground Railroad, because people will think it's a railroad, but we need to write down that it's not. It's just like something else.
Right, so that's like a figurative term, right? We've been talking about figurative versus literal. So Underground Railroad does not equal a railroad. I think that's actually really important to write down. Good job, Raina. So, or something about Harriet Tubman helped guide slaves to freedom. Okay, so when you're taking notes, you want to read a big chunk of text, then stop and ask yourself, so what? What were the most important things? This can be hard in kids' books when you're reading about a topic, because like they like to tell you facts that are like super interesting. So when you're reading about tornadoes, they like to tell you about like the biggest one or how many people got killed. And that might not be the most important thing. It might be way more important to understand how tornadoes are formed, where they happen, right? Big topics. The last kind of note taking that I wanted to talk about today. So we've talked about boxes and bullets on paper. We've talked about Post-it notes. And if I were taking notes on what I said about Post-it notes, I would say Post-its, I'm going to put it in a box. When you're using Post-its, they're short. They're after a chunk of reading. And you take notes on important, not just interesting. So those are my 3 main points on a Post-it note. My last kind of note taking that we've done this year, I call a T-chart. Now, a T-chart for taking notes when you're learning something is a little different than the T-charts we used for Writer's Workshop. So when you're using a T-chart, and I don't think I've shown you how to do this yet, but I'd like you to do this starting next week. And when I'm looking out at you, I see a lot of you taking notes right now. You should be sitting up. You should have a pen or pencil in your hand, and you should be taking notes. So Zeta, I need to see you sitting up, sweetie, not turning off your screen. Thanks. All right, friends, sitting up, taking notes. A T-chart is where you take notes of literal facts on the left. So you might put the year down there, you might put a name down there, you might put some detail of what happened, all right? So maybe you write Underground Railroad. Underground Railroad. And I'll shorten it to RR because I can remember what that means. Your notes are for you, not for anybody else. The thing that I'd like you to put on the other side of a T-chart is the so what part. So I'm actually going to write so what with a big question mark. I know Ms. Laws uses that term a lot because it really is the most important thing. Like, why take notes unless there's a reason for it? So why have I written down Underground Railroad? Well, because for number 1, it's not a railroad, right? I'm going to write that down. That's what Raina said. It's not a railroad. What is it? It's a way, it's a route, it's a path, it's a whole bunch of people who helped sneak slaves out of the South. So it was like a way and people, it was a whole network who snuck slaves north to freedom. Although we have learned that north didn't exactly mean freedom. In fact, I've read about a community up in Canada where people left the United States because by then, Canada was a much better place to live in terms of slavery. Make sure that the video filters are not distracting you from taking your notes. Thank you. All right. So again, when you're taking notes with the T-chart, on the left, you're putting the facts, and on the right, you're putting so what. So for example, with 1851, is that what it said, 1851? Is that the date? I think so. So why would 1851 be important? What was going on in the United States in 1851? Clara?
There was slavery, and they were doing something about it.
That was going on, yeah. What was going on in the West, in like Oregon, that you guys just learned about in 1851? Haben?
Lewis and Clark.
It was later than Lewis and Clark. Lewis and Clark was like, what was it, 1818? It was earlier. So later. Alaya?
No slaves.
People were bringing slaves illegally to Oregon.
Well, that wasn't quite happening yet because Oregon was just getting settled, but you're right, it was illegal. Emily?
Oregon just became a state?
Not until 1858, so not quite yet. This is before, this is during the Oregon Trail, right? So this is when all those settlers were coming out to Oregon. So you just learned about people moving.
Not allowed in Oregon.
Yeah. So 1851, so the whole thing with slavery and the Civil War going on down in the South and the eastern part of the United States was happening at the same time that people were leaving and coming west. So the same time as the Oregon Trail. So it's kind of interesting because it's almost like two separate histories, but they were happening at the same time. And we've just learned, like, you would think to yourself, well, if all those people were going to Oregon, I'll bet a lot of slaves did want to go to Oregon and get some free land. But was that an option? Nope, we've learned that that was not an option for the slaves. All right, friends, that is my entire lesson on note taking really, really fast. You're going to be doing a lot of note taking in the next 4 weeks on your topic that you're choosing for your nonfiction book. I will present that project not next week, but the week after, because next week you have a different project that you're going to be doing. So we'll talk about that. And also next week's project, I was going to tell you, next week's project is a project that normally in class we would do in groups. So if any of you feel like you've started Zooming with each other or calling each other or kind of gotten to know some kids and you feel like you'd like to work with a group of kids that you've gotten to know in class, you are welcome to do your project together. If you'd like to work with kids, but you really haven't gotten in touch, I think it's kind of hard to do it because you only have 4 days to do this project next week. And so I think it would be hard to do. And the one I'm talking about is the Oregon travel project that you're going to be presented on Monday, or you can sneak ahead and look at it now if you want to. It's for next Monday. All right.